And do I think that there's complicity when people don't vote based off of their beliefs about the government, or their apathy towards the government? I mean, I think there's a bit of complicity, some passive complicity there, sure. I think it behooves us all to vote, and I very much encourage people to vote on a regular basis. So yeah, that's where I lie with it. I think, in a sense, they're right. I don't know that I would be as harsh as they were about it, but I absolutely think they're correct.
And finally, Joe Lewis.
I think that there's a lot of problems with electoralism in the United States, and I'm not gonna fault anybody who chooses not to vote. There's always this sort of like individual level on these approaches to these problems, and it's the same critique that I have with this tweet, where it's like, oh no, I'm not gonna vote. Well, you're a fascist and you're a racist, and it's like, okay, and nigga, like, what are you gonna do about it? Like, you're gonna do shit. You're just gonna be upset, and then you're on to the next thing. The thing that I'm very concerned about, and this is like kind of thing that I'm frustrated with, is that when you have so time and time again individuals that are on the ballot that do not represent the ideals, the policies, the practices that you care about, what are you supposed to do? And then what happens is you get a lot of the liberals who go for sort of like the pragmatic argument of like, well, you're voting for the lesser of two evils. And it's like, neither of these individuals represent my values. They don't represent what I stand for. So why should I be forced to vote? I personally consider non-voting a decision that you can make, and it's a totally fine decision. Now, something that I would totally be in favor of supporting is the expansion of understanding why people are not voting. That is something that doesn't exist in the electoral process right now at all. Where somebody chooses not to vote, there's no sort of follow-up to understand why they're not participating in the process in the first place. There could be a lot of reasons for that. It could be due to what I'm talking about in terms of ideas and values. It could have something to do with their work situation, like something to do with their current life situation. But we see time and time again that, like, if we want to extrapolate this tweet, there's a lot of people who aren't voting. So there's a lot of racists, transphobes, fascists, and that's not necessarily productive. But I also think it's unproductive to just tell people that they should vote no matter what without taking an honest observation of the electoral process and how we can make it better. But again, I'm not gonna waste time trying to like, well, if you're not voting, you're part of the problem type of shit. Like, if people choose not to vote, that's their prerogative. But I'm more concerned about why people aren't voting and why the electoral process is so fucked in a vast majority of states. So.
Yeah, and I'll give my opinion. I'm closer to Joe on this one, in that I think that it's easy to point fingers at individuals who aren't voting, but I I I feel that oftentimes the onus needs to be on our elected officials to convince them to vote. I think that for many people, they're not for all, but for many, they're making an honest assessment of the choices they have, and they find them lacking. And that can be for a variety of reasons. But will we just say, hey, you just got to go to the ballot box? Go to the ballot box for what? To get what? For what results? Um, I think if the best you have is to say that things will get worse otherwise, right? Like the other side is just so scary it'll get worse. You're not going to get very far with that. But yeah, when everyone else. All right, so let's go to Zonia and then Ninetales.
Yeah, so overall, like I would say, definitely don't demonize the abstainers. I think that's really important. I think that's part of the problem that we've had with a lot of animosity and a lack of willingness to understand why it is that people are abstaining from votes in the first place. There's a lack of empathy. And people are too quick to kind of say, "Oh, you're the problem." Like I remember that happened when Bush won in 2000, and I remember that when Trump won. The same kind of thing happened, just demonizing abstainers and demonizing third party voters. And that's not solving the problem. That's simply just creating more animosity and more division and not actually recognizing why it is that people are wanting to vote for you in the first place, or vote for your candidate in the first place. And so it's very important to make sure that we don't just simply dismiss these things as you filthy abstainers, and instead try to understand what is causing the abstaining from voting.
Ninetales, please.
Hi, yeah. So, first of all, I do want to say, and this is partially in response to Jason's introduction, uh, when I say that I lean towards it, I don't mean under our current system. In fact, I have a huge issue with how people are expected to vote in a system that doesn't represent them. And I do think this is contingent on the idea that they are able to vote for their interests in the first place. And that's commonly not the case. And that's why saying, well, this is the way the system is, isn't really a good argument for the people who aren't voting. I I think the left overall just does a bad job talking to voters who have abstained, talking about it. That tweet that this is referencing is a good example. I don't think that's very constructive criticism. I do think the context of this, from my best guess and just from seeing the overall backlash on Twitter, is actually how in Ontario the Conservative Party basically won the provincial elections, basically kind of like a landslide, and it was very sad and a big swing for us in terms of our elections, and a lot of people abstained. And I was very let down by the way the left talked about it. Like, not everybody's terrible, but we do have to look into these factors, like the material conditions and stuff like that. So as it stands, just to be clear, when I say I lean towards it, that's just like when I'm sitting on the fence. But in general, I am not happy with the way that things are at the moment at all. I think the left needs to do to build off of Madame Genevieve's point. The left needs to do more to actually build things like on the grounds for so that way more people will vote, and also influence more politics, and just do a better job supporting narratives of like politics that exist. I may not be a good example of that, but I'm not trying to be a politician either. Um, my last point is that we do have to think about this as logistics. I don't think that just because somebody doesn't do electoralism in their activism, that doesn't mean they're not doing a good job. There's a lot of ways that you can do leftist activism, and expecting people to focus on both. And that doesn't mean voting. As far as voting goes, that does kind of make sense for to expect people like to do that in a vacuum. But as far as just because a leftist cause isn't trying to promote voting for a particular candidate, they're not necessarily doing a good job. And we do need to focus on caring for the underclass and promoting them and our voices just as much as if not more, than we focus on electoral politics. Oh, and my chat pointed something out. I was going to say it too, but they just reminded me. Not voting is not the same as voting for no one. When you actually submit the ballot with no one on the ballot, just to be clear, statistically, that is more significant than simply not going to the polls.
Sorry,
Okay.
what was that last part? Could you?
Yeah, I don't
It
understand.
makes it's more meaningful for people who are abstaining their votes to actually go to the polls and mark no one on the ballot than submit it, because then there's at least a
Why?
ballot to be counted, and
Oh.
you're
Because you get turnout, and in addition to that, it shows the lack of faith in turnout, as opposed to just being, apathetic or uninterested.
Mhm.
so like
that
if you're
can be a
How does
motivator.
that even affect anything?
like if
Like,
you're
at
a
the end of the day?
researcher, yeah, if you're a researcher and you want to find a link to current trends, or think popular dynamics in society, and you want to say look, here's evidence that people actually feel disenfranchised from the voting system, then an empty ballot is more significant than no vote at all, because there can be many other material reasons that people just don't go to vote, but it doesn't mean that they're not politically active in their minds.
Yeah.
Okay,
Or-
this
or-
is what I want to know from all the people that keep on saying that people aren't being represented. We live in a representative democracy, right? People who go to the polls elect people that go into office, and then, vote on things that broadly align with their values. So, in like what way are y'all meaning people aren't being adequately represented?
I don't understand
My
that
problem
statement.
with
Are you?
my problem
Is there
That's why I asked.
is there an absence of understanding that people advocate for a particular policy, and certain candidates might not even advocate for that policy at all? Like, I don't understand what that says. What you're trying to say there? Can you rephrase it?
Yeah, so can I just quickly jump in? We can also describe this as a conflict between the voting body and their interests and the interests proposed by the people who are up for election.
Okay, but the people that propose things that are up for election, like broadly speaking, they will vote in their like what their constituents want them to vote for, right?
Do you think that
disagree
there's a
with that?
difference between constituents and an electorate in this case?
Can you like make the distinction for me?
I'm asking you if you understand a distinction between constituents and an electorate. That's my question.
Well, I'm asking you to like explain it to me because I'm
What I'm
not
at, so
in
do you,
this,
so
in the
try
context that we're talking
your
about.
best. Like, what do you see as a constituents and what do you see as an electorate?
Constituents, so electorate would be the people that are voting, and constituents are the people that are within the district of the people. Is that where the distinction?
I'm trying to
you're making?
ask what you believe those terms are.
That's
What
what
do you?
I
What,
just
so
told
let's start with an electorate. What do you believe an electorate to be?
you. People that go out and vote in their interests, probably.
Well, it's eligible voters in electorate, right? So
well, would
it's
you
basically
consider
anybody who has the opportunity or has the option to vote? Or that's the electorate.
I consider evangelical Christians as an electorate within the Republican Party. Do you agree with that statement?
Sure.
Now, constituents, in this case, we'll use this. We'll make it similar. We'll make it the same thing. The constituents and electorates. It doesn't matter which term you use. It just means that a political interest group or some interest group within a voting base. So we'll use that as a definition. Is that okay to proceed with that idea?
Sure. Yeah.
Great. So if evangelical Christians do not feel that the Republican that is currently on the ballot supports the policies that they want, what do you believe that they should do? Should they still vote for that Republican, or should they choose to vote for an alternative candidate that supports the things that they're interested in?
Well, if an evangelical is like going out to vote and they want to see their values kind of enacted into law, they should probably vote for whoever is most aligned with that, or vote for someone in the primaries that is the closest to their values as possible.
What if
Right.
that candidate isn't within a third party?
And what if that candidate is within a third party
Yes,
or isn't?
let's say the
Okay.
candidate that is aligned with their views is within a third party.
Well, I mean, they can vote for that person, but like effectively, they're throwing their vote away because
Why?
we have a two-party system that we have two parties that are in power right now.
Okay,
Right.
so because two parties are in power, that means that people shouldn't vote for candidates that vote
Well, if they
that
care about changing things, yeah.
I don't I'm not, that's not tracking for me. You're gonna have to really walk me through that.
Okay,
Well,
so if you actually if you understand the fact that like the Green Party doesn't have any power in the United States really, and if you recognize that the Libertarian Party doesn't have any power in the United States right now, all right, then you're essentially throwing away your vote.
But again, I that's not tracking for me. So I asked
Why?
you specifically, like, so you feel that groups of electorates, in this case we'll use evangelical Christians, should vote for candidates that encapsulate their values and beliefs. Do you agree with that?
What I'm trying to say is, if you are like trying to enact change, there are specific values that you want, right? And you recognize the fact that there is a two-party system right now in the United States, right? Then you should probably vote for whoever is closest aligned to your values, given the choice between two options.
And if nobody is aligned with the two options, they should not vote for a third party candidate. What should they do with their vote
Well,
that
I
you
just
consider?
said what I just said
What do you
was they should vote
consider?
for
What do
who
you
is
consider? What do you
the
consider?
closest.
What do you consider valuable for them? Voting for a candidate that lines up to their beliefs and what they advocate for, or not voting at all? Because those are the two options that you're currently presenting. It's either
I'm saying vote for whoever has is the closest to your set of values
within
right?
the two parties,
So
though. Correct?
yes, because otherwise you're not going to get a libertarian.
So what
electorate.
is how does if evangelical Christians believe that neither the Democrat that's being brought up on the ballot and the Republican that's being brought up on the ballot represent what they want, why should they vote for a Republican? Why should they vote for a Democrat? What value is there?
What value is there? Well, at the very least, you're going to be voting for someone that is closer to your values and probably isn't going to vote against, vote to enact things that you're like diametrically opposed to, right? So let's take
I'm
Trump,
having
for
trouble.
instance.
I'm having trouble with this proximity thing.
I can
This-
see. I
like-
can see that. Yeah.
Yeah,
What's-
it
what is the
doesn't make
trouble?
sense. I'm just trying to understand where it's coming from. Like, why is the closeness? Like, I'm saying that there's no equal interests. There's no interests that evangelical Christians in this hypothetical have with either candidate. So what's this proximity?
So you're saying that I don't understand in this hypothetical how there can't be one candidate that is closer to their values than the other.
We can move on from that. I don't know how to engage.
because I'm asking you, right? If you are
okay. Go for it.
It doesn't matter, because if neither candidate fucking is expressing your interest in these two parties, and there's a third party candidate that does, fucking vote for the third party candidate.
okay, but let's take an example that we will let's take an example for that we would all be like a little bit more close to home, that we probably all care more about, right? Let's talk about like trans issues, right? Right now, Republicans are in power at the state level in a lot of different states, and they're enacting all these anti-trans bills, right? Now, Democrats might not have like the full best based opinion on trans people, right? But generally speaking, a Democratic politician isn't going to do anything nearly as egregious to trans people as a Republican would. So if you withhold your vote as a Democrat, or you vote for the Green Party, right? Someone who's not going to get elected into office, because most people don't either line up with the Green Party or with the Libertarian or whatever party, right? If you vote for a third party, they're not getting elected. You're basically voting for whoever wins, right?
Well, that's a great hypothetical, because I have spoken to a lot of trans individuals, and they've articulated to me in different ways that certain people within my district and do not represent trans people, period, whether it be Democrat or Republican. So if you are trans and if you don't have somebody that you feel is representative of that, what should they do? And then if there's a third party candidate that clearly in their messaging and in their rhetoric overtly has trans people in the forefront, are you saying that they should not vote for them because there's a two-party system, or are you saying that they should vote for them? I'm trying to understand where you're at.
And Sondsol,
okay, so if there is a party,
I'm gonna let you finish. I'm just gonna say, I'm letting everyone know that after that, Zonia, Genevieve, Ninetails, Jason, just letting them know. Go ahead, Sondsol.
Okay, so if there is a Democrat that is not explicitly in favor of trans, like a pro-trans legislation, right? But there is a Republican who is explicitly anti-trans, you would probably want to vote for someone who is more in line with your values, even if they're agnostic on it, or if they are neutral on it, or whatever. That's better than being like on the opposite end of the spectrum on it and being like anti-trans.
So
right?
So you're saying within the two-party system that we're under, a trans individual should vote for, in this case, in this hypothetical that we're laying out here, a Democrat over a third-party candidate that overtly recognizes them within their politics. Is that your stance?
Because that politician isn't going to be elected and actually represent them.
So then my question to you then is, what do you think is more valuable here? Trying to uplift third-party candidates so that they're competitive, or catering to Democrats because third parties are inoperable currently? What's more valuable to you?
I would say it's more valuable to vote for Democrats because, like, number one, if we're trying to uplift third-party candidates, we're not going to do that by voting for third-party candidates in the current system. Right now, we don't have we have first past the post still like going on. We don't have ranked choice voting. We don't have anything like that. So without those things, a third-party candidate isn't going to be elected.
Do you think that there's a way to...
Well, hold on, really quick.
Sure, yeah.
What party is more likely to start advocating for like ranked choice voting or some other system of voting that would be more inclusive to third parties? Well, right now it's going to be more progressive Democrats, right? Rather than...
How can you quantify that statement? Like, where do we see this advocacy?
sure, we can look at people like AOC and Ilhan Omar who have expressed interest in that sort of thing. We can look at basically any like progressive, like at the state level. Some centrist Democrats, I don't know, like at the state level, which ones have expressed interest at that, because I don't know all politicians. I don't have all knowledge of all politicians in my mind. But generally speaking, if you're going to be looking to increase the power of third-party candidates, you're going to want to vote for someone that's going to get rid of first past the post, enact some kind of ranked choice voting, et cetera, et cetera.
What has their argument of third party or really like ranked choice voting looked like? Like, what have they explicitly said? Because you mentioned AOC and someone else I don't remember, but what have they said?
I don't have
implemented
a-
ranked choice voting in New York because of AOC championing it, right?
Sure, that's one candidate, but I want to know what the language of that looks like. What does that look like?
Well, I don't have an exact quote on me right now. I know that they've been at least like outwardly supportive of the idea of ranked choice voting, right? And
Sure.
if AOC got it to happen in New York, right? I don't see why we wouldn't think that this is possible.
Sure, and I guess to close out this exchange, the thing that I'm kind of stuck on is I don't see how you can say that somebody who or tell any individual that if there's a candidate that directly aligns with what they believe in, that they shouldn't vote for them and they ought to vote for something within a two-party system. I don't understand that level of advocacy, and maybe like we're probably not gonna have time to get into like where that comes from, but I'm good with it for now. Thanks for the back and forth.
Oh no, yeah, absolutely.